A Swiss guard collapsed before the Holy Father's coffin. But this was no fall from weakness. It was a manifestation of love. So, what happened? Why did a soldier, standing ramrod straight, suddenly drop to his knees and lose consciousness? Was this merely a physical collapse, or the eruption of an emotion he had carried within him for years? This incident, occurring in the most silent moment of the ceremony, may have seemed like a simple fainting spell, but behind it lies a heart-wrenching story. The handkerchief in young Leo's pocket, inscribed with the word courage, had been given to him years ago by the Holy Father himself. And now, that handkerchief was trying to keep a soldier on his feet. But sometimes, sorrow can bring even the strongest to their knees. This video is the story not of a vigil, but of a farewell. If you don't want to miss deep and true stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Because sometimes, a fall is the ultimate symbol of devotion. Time stood still in the heart of the Vatican. The funeral of the Holy Father, seen by millions as their spiritual father, had taken the world's breath away. As tens of thousands of people filled St. Peter's Square, undulating like a monolithic ocean of grief, there stood a rock in the midst of that ocean, the young Swiss guard, Leo. He was 22, but the expression on his face carried the solemnity of a centuries-old duty. His eyes were locked on the massive doors of the basilica directly opposite. He did not glance for a single moment at the weeping cardinal to his right, nor at the whispering heads of state to his left. The Renaissance-era uniform he wore, rumored to be designed by Michelangelo, was not merely clothing, but armor worn under oath. Beneath his gleaming metal helmet, a thin bead of sweat trickled from his forehead to his temples, but it was not from the scorching Roman sun. It was the first drop escaping the relentless storm raging in the depths of his soul, the brutal war between duty and grief. With every breath, it was not just the sharp scent of ceremonial incense that filled his lungs, but also the effort to suppress a sob caught in his throat. To the outside world, he was a living statue of unwavering discipline, absolute obedience, and a sacred tradition. No one could see that within that statue, the heart of an orphaned boy, bidding farewell to his father, was breaking into 1,000 pieces. For Leo, the Holy Father was not just a spiritual leader, he was the spiritual father who had found him as a 12-year-old orphan, who had given him a purpose, a family, and, most importantly, faith. In the palm of his hand, hidden beneath his ceremonial glove, was a small treasure. A linen handkerchief the Holy Father had gifted him years ago, during one of his first days on duty. Upon it, in the Pope's own handwriting, was embroidered a single word, courage. That handkerchief had become Leo's refuge in his weakest moments, his silent companion during the most arduous vigils. Now, the meaning of that word was more profound than ever. Courage was standing for hours without moving, without even twitching a muscle, without letting the flood of sorrow inside him overflow from his eyes. Courage was imprisoning every emotion that made you human beneath a suit of armor and remaining upright solely through the steely will of your duty. In his mind, his commander's voice from training echoed, "Remember, you are not just soldiers. You are the protectors of the honor and dignity of this holy office. All eyes will always be on you. There will be those who want to weaken you, to humiliate you, to tarnish everything you represent." How true those words were. The acts of disrespect he had witnessed during his watches flashed before his eyes like a film strip. Tourists who tried to tug at their uniforms, who got right in their faces making funny faces to try and make them laugh. He had once witnessed the arrogance of a group of teenagers who, just to shoot a social media video, had hurled racist insults at a black comrade, interpreting his lack of reaction as a sign of cowardice. The steely patience he saw in his friend's eyes at that moment taught him once again what discipline meant. They were not emotionless robots, on the contrary, they were seasoned soldiers with wills strong enough to sacrifice their emotions for the sake of their honor and their duty. That was why he could not fall now, here, before the eyes of millions. His love for his spiritual father could not allow him to tarnish his final duty with weakness. For the world outside, he was Swiss guard Leo. But the child inside him was being crushed under the weight of warm memories of the Pope calling him "my son." The most challenging moment of the ceremony was approaching. He could feel the coffin carrying that sacred vessel slowly advancing towards the square from behind the massive basilica doors. The murmur of the crowd gave way to a deep, reverent silence. There was nothing in the air but the sound of the wind and the approaching footsteps. Leo squeezed the handkerchief under his glove one last time. "Courage," he whispered to himself. Just a few more hours. He continued to stare ahead without blinking. But there was something he did not know at that moment. Sometimes the greatest courage is not to stand tall, but to have the fortitude to kneel with honor under the weight of love. And his greatest test, in truth, was just beginning. As the doors began to creak open, Leo knew he was entering the longest and most difficult watch of his life. This was not just a soldier's duty, it was a son's farewell, and this farewell would push the limits of his endurance to the very end. When those massive, bronze doors opened slowly and thunderously, the tens of thousands of whispers in the square were instantly cut short, replaced by a graveyard silence. Leo's heart hammered against his ribcage like a sledgehammer. Each beat tried to drown out his commander's stern voice, "Control your breath, control your heart, control your mind." But it was impossible. For what emerged from between the doors was not just the Holy Father's simple wooden coffin, it was Leo's entire past, his hopes, and every precious memory he had collected of the man he saw as his father, all following in its wake. The slow, rhythmic steps of the pallbearers echoed on the marble floor of the square like the final heartbeats of an era. Each step brought the coffin a few inches closer to Leo, cracking his internal shield a little more. His eyes were fixed on the coffin, but he wasn't really seeing it. His mind had traveled back years, to a secluded garden in the Vatican. He was just 18 then, in his rookie days, feeling lost inside this enormous uniform. One day, he had cut his hand while pruning roses and grimaced in pain. The Holy Father, taking a solitary prayer walk in the garden, had noticed him. He came over, and with that weary but always compassionate smile, said, "The soldier's blood is sacred, but it should be shed for duty, not on the soil." Then he took that simple linen handkerchief from his pocket and gently wrapped Leo's bleeding finger. At that moment, Leo was speechless with shame and awe. The Holy Father knew he was an orphan. Looking deep into his eyes, he had said, "This uniform makes you a guard, Leo. But it is the heart within that makes you a man. And what a man needs most is courage. Not just against the enemy, but against his own sorrow, his own loneliness." That day, he had gifted him the handkerchief, adding that single word to it. The warmth of that memory collided with the ice-cold reality of the present, and a tremor ran through Leo. Those gentle hands were gone now. That wise voice would be heard no more. All that remained was that simple wooden coffin and the shared grief of millions. As the coffin drew nearer, Leo's breath began to shorten. The air inside his helmet seemed to have run out. The halberd, which normally felt like an extension of his arm, its weight unnoticed, now felt like a burden of several tons on his shoulders. He could feel the muscles in his legs beginning to tremble. "Endure," he commanded himself. "This is your duty. This is your honor." But his body had begun to rebel against his will. The crowd before his eyes blurred into a swirl of colors. The ringing in his ears drowned out the hymns and the weeping in the square. It was as if he were sinking into deep water, struggling to reach the surface but failing. What did the onlookers see? They saw only a stoic, steel-like soldier, part of a flawless symmetry. A journalist focusing his long lens camera on him thought he was capturing the perfect shot for his story, the unwavering discipline of the Swiss Guards. A tourist, whispering to his friend, said, "It's incredible, they don't even blink. It's like they're made of stone." This illusion, this superficial gaze, only added to the weight on Leo's shoulders. Oh, if only they knew what a volcano was about to erupt inside that stone. If only they knew that the seemingly unbreakable discipline was, in fact, the last thread holding a shattered heart together. The procession was like a scene from a slow-motion film. The red robes of the cardinals glided across the marble floor like stains of blood. The Latin requiem sung by the choir rose to the sky and merged with the clouds. But for Leo, all this splendor, all this ceremony, had lost its meaning. All he saw was the final journey of the man who had given him an identity, who had taught him to believe, and who was now being taken from him forever. The coffin came to a stop directly in front of him, only a few meters away. Leo felt with his entire being the grain of the polished wood, the scent of the ceremonial flowers, and the crushing weight of that moment. He understood then that he was alone at the intersection of metal and wood, of duty and memory, of life and death. He felt his knees begin to give way. The last shred of strength within him was about to desert him. At that instant, the single word radiating from the handkerchief under his glove, courage, was no longer a powerful command in his mind, but a death-rattling whisper. His body was about to surrender to the overwhelming grief his soul could no longer carry. And before the eyes of tens of thousands, history held its breath to witness that moment. Time slowed. In Leo's mind, that moment was measured not in seconds, but in heartbeats. Each beat was slower and more muffled than the last. The coffin before him was no longer just wood and flowers, it had transformed into the tangible, physical weight of love, grief, and gratitude. And that weight, like an invisible hand, pressed down on Leo's shoulders. The first sign was the numbness in his fingers. The gleaming metal halberd, which for years he had carried as a part of his body, knowing its every contour, suddenly became a foreign and unbearably heavy object. His fingers loosened. His commander's order, "Your weapon is your honor, never drop it," faded into a helpless whisper echoing in the depths of his brain. The halberd slipped from his hand. The sound of the polished metal striking the cold marble cracked like a whip in the square that had fallen silent to tens of thousands. The sound was louder than silence, more shocking. It was not just the sound of a weapon falling, but the sound of a seemingly unbreakable discipline shattering. A ripple of gasps spread through the crowd. All eyes, which until then had seen a uniform part of a whole, now turned to that single guard, Leo, who had become the center of the flaw. The fall of the halberd was followed by the buckling of his knees. It was not a sudden collapse. It was a slow, agonizing descent, as if the weight of centuries had settled upon him. His legs simply refused to support his body any longer. The world before his eyes blurred, the colors mixing like a painter's palette, and then it slowly faded to black. The last thing he heard before losing consciousness was the melody of a lullaby his mother used to sing to him as a child, and the last thing he saw was the white linen handkerchief, slipping from his glove and floating in slow motion towards the ground. That small piece of hope, inscribed with courage, fluttered like a sorrowful butterfly in the air before landing right beside the path where his spiritual father's coffin was to pass. It seemed like a moment of shame. The fall of a soldier on duty, in front of millions. The whispers in the crowd were now more distinct. He fainted. "My God, did you see that? What great disrespect." The clicks of camera shutters fired like a machine gun, immortalizing the moment. Each flash recorded Leo's crumpled form and the drama of the instant for history. This was the very moment Leo had feared most, the one his commander had constantly warned them about, the calamitous moment you show weakness, tarnish the perfect image, and give your enemies a chance to mock. But this did not become a moment of shame. It was, in fact, the silent declaration of the highest order of allegiance. Before Leo's body had fully hit the marble floor, his two brothers in arms, standing like rocks beside him, moved. Not a single word was spoken between them, not even a glance was exchanged. Years of shared training, countless nights on watch, and an unbreakable bond of brotherhood had made them move as a single body. One caught the falling Leo under the arms, breaking his fall gently, while the other, in the same fluid motion, recovered the fallen halberd from the ground. It was all over in seconds. So swiftly, in fact, that most of the crowd hadn't fully understood what had happened. One moment there was a heap of uniform on the ground, and the next, that heap was being held up with dignity in the arms of two ramrod straight guards. The procession paused for only a few seconds. The guards, without a moment's hesitation, began to carry their unconscious comrade back with great reverence, as if this, too, were a pre-planned part of the ceremony. There was no panic or surprise on their faces. Only a steely will, focused on their duty. This was not the fall of a soldier, it was living proof of how one brother is held up by another, of how unity and fellowship manifest in the most difficult moments. Leo had lost consciousness, but he was not alone. The arms that caught him had not only prevented a physical fall, they had also protected his honor, showing the entire world that this profound grief was not a weakness, but the greatest oath of allegiance. Leo's eyes fluttered open to the sight of an unfamiliar, ornate ceiling. For a brief, blissful moment, he didn't know where he was or what had happened. There was only a dull ache in his head and a profound emptiness in his chest. Then, like a tidal wave, memory crashed down upon him. The square. The coffin. The sound of his halberd hitting the marble. The collective gasp. Shame, hot and suffocating, flooded his entire being. He had failed. In the most public way imaginable, he had failed his duty, his brothers in arms, and the memory of the man he loved as a father. He was in a small, quiet room off one of the main corridors of the Apostolic Palace. The muffled sounds of the ongoing ceremony, the distant choir, the solemn pronouncements, filtered through the thick stone walls, each note a painful reminder of his disgrace. A fellow guard stood silently in the corner, his face unreadable, which somehow made it worse. Leo wished the ground would open up and swallow him whole. He had brought dishonor to the uniform, a stain on a 500-year-old legacy of unwavering discipline. His career was over. More than that, he felt he had betrayed the Pope's final gift, the simple command, courage. He was trying to sit up when the heavy oak door opened. Commander Richter entered the room. A man carved from alpine granite, Richter's face was a testament to decades of service, his eyes having witnessed the passage of 3 popes. He was the embodiment of the Swiss Guard's discipline and honor, a figure Leo both feared and deeply respected. Leo's heart sank. The formal reprimand, the dismissal, was coming. He braced himself for the verbal onslaught he so richly deserved. The commander dismissed the other guard with a silent, almost imperceptible nod. The door clicked shut, leaving the two of them in a heavy silence. Leo struggled to his feet, his body trembling, intending to stand at attention and accept his fate. "Commander, I have no excuse. I have failed." His voice cracked, thick with shame. Richter didn't shout. He didn't even scowl. Instead, he did something Leo never could have anticipated. He walked over, placed a firm hand on the young guard's shoulder, and gently pushed him back to a sitting position on the velvet-covered bench. "Breathe, soldier." Richter's voice was low, but carried an authority that commanded more obedience than any shout. He waited a moment, letting the silence settle again. Then he knelt on one knee in front of Leo, bringing their eyes to the same level. This gesture alone was so shocking, so contrary to all protocol, that it left Leo speechless. Commanders did not kneel to disgraced recruits. "Tell me what you think happened out there, Leo," Richter said, his gaze unwavering. Leo could only stammer. "I was weak, sir. I lost control. I dishonored us all." Commander Richter shook his head slowly, a flicker of something that looked like disappointment in his eyes, but it wasn't directed at Leo's actions. It was directed at his words. "You are wrong," he stated, the words simple but absolute. What the world saw out there was not weakness. Do not ever mistake profound love for weakness. From his pocket, Richter produced the small, white linen handkerchief. It was slightly dusty from its fall on the marble. He placed it gently into Leo's trembling hand. "He gave you this, did he not? To remind you of courage." Leo could only nod, tears now welling in his eyes. "The courage to stand for hours in the sun is one thing, Leo. That is training. The courage to face a threat is another. That is duty. But the courage to love someone so deeply that their loss physically breaks you, that is a different kind of strength altogether. It is the strength of the soul." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to an intense whisper. The cameras in the crowd saw a soldier fainting. They saw a flaw in the ceremony. I saw something else. I saw a son, overwhelmed with grief, serving his father until his heart could literally no longer bear the strain inside his chest. You stood your post not just with your body, but with every fiber of your being, and your being was shattered. That is not a failure of discipline, Leo. That is the ultimate testament of loyalty. A loyalty that runs deeper than muscle and bone, a loyalty of the spirit. The commander's words washed over Leo, extinguishing the searing fire of his shame and replacing it with a dawning, unbelievable sense of relief. The tears he had fought back for so long finally broke free, streaming silently down his cheeks. But these were not tears of shame or sorrow. They were tears of understanding. Richter had not seen a failure, he had seen the truth of Leo's heart. He had redefined Leo's greatest moment of shame into his most profound act of love. He had given him back his honor. Richter stood up, his duty as a compassionate leader fulfilled. Our purpose is not to be unfeeling statues of stone, Leo. It is to be men of honor. And honor requires a heart. You have more heart than any man I have seen in a long time. With those words, the world shifted on its axis for Leo. He looked down at the handkerchief in his hand, then back at the door through which he could hear the faint sounds of the ongoing farewell. He was still a soldier. He was still a son. And he knew, with a clarity that cut through all the pain, that his final tribute had not yet been paid. His duty was not yet over. Commander Richter's words were like a torch illuminating the darkest corners of Leo's soul. Years of military training had taught him how to hide his weakness, how to suppress his emotions. But Richter, in a mere 10-second speech, had shown him that what he thought was his greatest weakness was, in fact, his most human and honorable strength. The weight lifted from his shoulders was so immense that for a moment he felt light, as if freed from gravity. He wiped his tears, not with the back of his hand this time, but with the self-assurance of a soldier. He stood up. The trembling, shame-filled young man of seconds ago was gone, replaced by a guard with a steely resolve shining in his eyes. His posture straightened, his chin lifted. He looked into Commander Richter's eyes with the respect his rank demanded, but also with the gratitude one human feels for another. His voice was no longer a whisper, but a clear, steady tone. "Commander," he said, "I must go back. I must complete my watch." It was not a plea, nor was it a request. It was the declaration of an irreversible decision. There was no surprise on Richter's face. Only an expression of understanding, of expectation even. He had seen that new fire in Leo's eyes. This was not an attempt to mend a broken pride. This was a necessity born of respect for the sanctity of his duty and his love for his spiritual father. The commander said nothing, only gave a single, solemn nod. It was more than permission, it was a sign of trust, of affirmation. He added silently, make him proud. When Leo left the room, his steps were now more confident, more determined. A few officials and priests in the corridor who saw him made way in astonishment, seeing the soldier they expected to be carried out on a stretcher now walking tall back towards the ceremony. He didn't even notice their gazes. He had a single objective in his mind, the marble square he had been forced to abandon. When he stepped back into St. Peter's Square, the roar of the crowd momentarily dazed him, but it did not break his will. Some curious eyes turned to him, and the whispers started again. But this time, the tone of the whispers was different. It was not mockery or condemnation, but a kind of astonishment, even admiration. The will of a soldier to return to his post after such an incident, as if nothing had happened, was not something ordinary people could comprehend. As he advanced towards his rank, his two brothers in arms, who had carried him, noticed his approach from the corners of their eyes. Again, not a single word passed between them. As Leo drew near, the two guards, with the flawless military precision of a move rehearsed for years, took a single step to the side to make room for him. It was a moment of acceptance too profound for words. They had not judged him. They had not seen him as weak. They had simply lifted a fallen brother and were now taking him back to where he belonged, by their side. Leo took his halberd from his friend's hand. When the coldness of the metal touched his palm, he no longer felt that unbearable weight. Instead, there was a familiar, reassuring feeling. The resonant sound made when he placed the butt of the halberd back on its spot on the marble floor was like the renewal of an oath. And at that moment, his watch resumed. To an outsider, nothing had changed. The same upright posture, the same gaze fixed forward, the same unwavering position. But inside, everything was different for Leo. He was no longer trying to suppress his pain, to fight his grief. On the contrary, he had accepted his grief and made it a part of his duty. He was no longer just a sentry. He was a son paying his respects to the memory of his spiritual father. Every breath was a prayer, every second of his unshakable stance an expression of gratitude. For the remainder of the ceremony, as the Holy Father's coffin was blessed with final prayers and carried into the basilica, Leo watched it without blinking an eye. This was not a look of pain, but a farewell filled with love and respect. When those massive doors closed behind the coffin, even as the crowd in the square began to slowly disperse, he did not move from his spot. His official watch was over, but his personal farewell was complete when those doors closed. He had not fallen. He had knelt to show how powerful love is, and then he had returned to his duty, stronger than ever before. He had proven what true courage means, both to himself and to the few fortunate eyes that had watched him. The ceremony was over, and the crushing weight on the ancient stones of St. Peter's Square was slowly lifting. The sea of grief formed by tens of thousands had receded, leaving behind only the melancholic hum of emptiness, the sound of pigeons' wings, and the pale colors of a Roman sky preparing for sunset. As a historic day drew to a close with its memories and tears, Leo remained at his post, unmoving as a monument. The official duty was done, the ceremony had concluded, but he waited for those last few moments his heart allowed him, to complete his own silent, personal tribute. As the world around him began to return to its normal rhythm, the whispers of cleaning crews, the sound of security barriers being collected, Leo was the master of his own time. In that moment, that square of marble was not just a duty station for him, but an altar of transformation. He had fallen there, and there he had been reborn. Finally, when it was time to return to his unit, he shouldered his halberd slowly, as if performing a rite, and began to withdraw with measured steps. Just as he turned to enter the shaded courtyard of the palace, his eyes met those of Commander Richter, who was standing far away at the head of the basilica's imposing steps. The commander was waiting for him. There were dozens of meters between them, a distance woven with respect and hierarchy. The commander did not shout, he did not gesture. He simply gave a slow, meaningful nod, the greatest tribute one soldier can give another, filled with the silent pride of a father for his son. This nod meant much more than duty completed. This nod meant, I am proud of you. This nod meant, you did not just protect honor, you redefined it. Leo returned the gesture with the same military solemnity and respect, and in that moment, he felt the last wound in his soul gently close. On that day, he had not merely stood guard at a funeral, he had passed one of the toughest tests of being human, and he had passed it with honor. Leo's story was silently written on the marbles of the Vatican that day, but its echoes extended far beyond the square's boundaries, reaching much deeper. This story whispers to us that strength is not always about standing tall, never faltering, or locking emotions behind a steel armor. Sometimes, true strength emerges in the most vulnerable moment, when crushed under the weight of the most human emotions, the deepest grief. True strength is your unwavering commitment to the values you represent, the oath you took, and the memories you love, even in a moment that could be labeled as weakness. The world saw a uniformed soldier faint, a flaw in a perfect ceremony. But what actually happened was that a son's love and gratitude for his spiritual father reached a dimension that transcended the physical limits of the human body. This was not a defeat, it was the purest, most unfiltered, most honorable victory of love. As his commander said, it was proof of a love and loyalty to duty that endured until exhaustion. This event is a powerful reminder that behind those shiny uniforms, those serious and expressionless faces, there are people just like us who feel, love, mourn, dream, and are ready to make any sacrifice for their honor. They are not lifeless props in the background of a tourist photo, but the living, breathing guardians of age-old traditions and unshakable values. The next time you see such a guard, think not only of the gleam of the uniform but also of the weight within the heart it contains. Perhaps at that moment, thousands of miles from home, he is mentally celebrating his child's birthday. Perhaps he is silently battling the pain of bad news he has received. But he, no matter what, stands there tall for your safety, for the continuation of a tradition, or for the honor of an oath. So, what are your thoughts? Is honor an outdated concept in the 21st century, or is it more vital than ever? In a world ruled by fleeting passions and instant popularity, what do unwavering loyalty and a sense of duty mean? In your opinion, how does true strength reveal itself in the most difficult moments? Was the moment Leo experienced one of weakness, or was it the highest echelon of honor and love? Share your thoughts, and perhaps your own stories of honor you've witnessed, in the comments below. Every comment makes this story more meaningful and reminds us all of the values we may have forgotten. Because remember, true strength lies not in never falling, but in rising stronger each time for the values you represent and the people you believe in. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss our new stories, and share this tale of honor with others who wonder about the meaning of true strength.